Commander Cashin Wolf is courting me. The problem was not that I doubted it anymore. The problem was that I was starting to believe him. 3 days had passed since he'd calmly informed me that yes, he was pursuing me, and somehow the situation had only become more dangerous since then. Not because he was aggressive, not because he was relentless. Quite the opposite. Cashin Wolf courted people the same way he commanded a fleet. Quietly, efficiently, and with terrifying attention to detail. "You're smiling again," Finn said. "I'm not. You are. Prove it. Your tail is wagging." I immediately looked behind me. My tail was, in fact, wagging. Traitor. That means nothing. Of course. Nothing at all. Naturally. I hate you. Mutual affection. I ignored him and returned to the report in front of me. Unfortunately, the report contained exactly 0 useful information and approximately 100% thoughts about Cashin Wolf. 3 days ago, he had admitted he was courting me. 2 days ago, he'd somehow researched foxes online. Yesterday, he'd given me a Black Panther plush that looked suspiciously like himself and accidentally revealed he owned the matching fox. Today, thankfully, he hadn't done anything strange. The universe heard that thought and immediately punished me. Lieutenant Ashford. I froze. That voice had become hazardous to my health. Looking up, I found Cashin standing beside my desk. "Commander, your meeting starts in 7 minutes. I know. You forgot your tablet." I looked down. My tablet was indeed sitting beside my elbow. "Right. And your access card." I looked again. My access card was also on the desk. Cashin placed both items in front of me. "You seem distracted today." "I'm not distracted. You forgot half your equipment." "That proves nothing." One eyebrow lifted slightly. "Interesting." "Stop saying interesting." "I didn't. You thought it." To my horror, amusement flickered briefly across his expression. Then his eyes drifted toward my uniform. "Hold still." My heart immediately attempted escape. "Why?" "Your collar." Before I could move, he reached forward and fixed the folded edge of my uniform collar. One smooth movement. Gentle. Familiar. Entirely too natural. There. The problem wasn't the gesture. The problem was that it looked effortless. Like he genuinely couldn't understand why having his fingers near my throat might be distracting. "Commander." "Yes." "Do you do this for everyone?" "No," my heartbeat stuttered. "Oh." Cashin looked genuinely confused. "Why would I?" Then he walked away. Just left. As if he hadn't casually destroyed my ability to think. 20 minutes later, a senior communications officer stopped me outside operations. "Lieutenant." "Yes." She hesitated. "Can I ask something?" "Probably." "Did Commander Wolf just fix your collar?" I closed my eyes. "Maybe. I've worked under him for 8 years." "Congratulations." He once made an admiral rewrite a report 14 times because the margins were wrong. That's not reassuring. My point is I've never seen him touch anyone. She paused. "Ever." Then she walked away. My soul left my body. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Every room I entered seemed to contain rumors. Every corridor seemed filled with knowing looks. The worst part was that none of them knew the truth. Nobody knew Cashin was courting me. Nobody knew he'd admitted it outright. Nobody knew he was slowly and methodically dismantling every defense I'd built over the years. They only knew something strange was happening. So did I? Because people always said Cashin Wolf was cold, distant, impossible to approach. Yet somehow he remembered which tea I preferred. He remembered my schedule. He remembered when I'd skipped lunch. He remembered things even I forgot. By evening, I was already exhausted from fighting my own thoughts. Which was exactly when I returned to my office and discovered a package sitting on my desk. Small. Black. Wrapped neatly. "No." I told it immediately. The package remained unconcerned. 5 minutes later, curiosity won. It always did. Inside sat a Black Panther plush. Soft black fur. Golden eyes. Tiny military jacket. Tiny serious expression. It looked exactly as judgmental as its owner. "You've got to be kidding me." A note rested underneath. "For morale purposes." Liar I. Informed the plush. 1 hour later, I was standing inside command holding the evidence. "Commander." Cashin looked up immediately. He always did lately. "Rowan." "Explain." I placed the plush directly onto his desk. He glanced down. "It's a panther." "I'm aware." "Good. Why is there a miniature version of you sitting on my desk?" "The resemblance is subjective. It has your face." "Strong genes." I stared at him. He stared back. Completely serious. Which somehow made it worse. "Why?" To my surprise, he actually answered. Research. Not this again. I asked a question online. That sentence never ends well. Several sources suggested gifts. What exactly did you search? Silence. Suspicious silence. Commander. Cash-in. He looked vaguely uncomfortable. How to court a fox. My brain stopped functioning. You searched what? Several versions of the question. Several. The results were inconsistent. So you conducted additional research? That seemed reasonable. I couldn't breathe. This was the most Cash-in wolf thing I had ever heard. Then something occurred to me. Wait. What? If I got the Panther? Cash-in immediately looked toward the left drawer of his desk. Mistake. Fatal mistake. I crossed the room before he could stop me. Opened the drawer. Froze. Inside sat a white fox plush. White fur. Blue eyes. Fluffy tail. Tiny blue scarf. My entire nervous system shut down. Slowly, very slowly, I turned around. Cash-in. Yes. Why do you have a fox? Research. Liar. Different research. Cash-in. He sighed. Symbolic gifts create emotional associations. You bought matching plushies. Possibly. You bought matching plushies. The evidence supports that conclusion. I stared at him. Then at the fox. Then at the panther in my arms. Then back at him. This is ridiculous. And yet you're smiling. Traitor. My face was a traitor. That's not the point. Then what's the point? The answer arrived before I could stop it. The point is that you're making this very difficult. Something softened in his expression. Good. Why? Because you're thinking about me. I pointed accusingly. That is a terrible strategy. It appears effective. The worst part was that he was right. Again, silence settled between us. Comfortable. Dangerous. Then Cash-in spoke quietly. Rowan. What? Are you still afraid? The question hit harder than expected. I looked away first. Maybe. Of me? No. The answer came immediately. Because despite everything, I'd never truly been afraid of him. Then what? I hesitated. Being wrong. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Cash-in leaned back in his chair. Calm. Patient. Certain. If I wanted someone else, he said simply, I wouldn't spend my evenings researching foxes. My heart completely surrendered. That is somehow the least romantic and most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. Good. Why is everything good? A rare smile appeared on his face. Small. Real. Dangerous. Because you're still here. And much later that night, lying in bed with an absurdly serious Black Panther plush sitting beside my pillow, I realized something terrifying. 3 days ago, I had been afraid Cash-in Wolf wasn't serious. Now I was afraid he was. Because every day he gave me another reason to believe him. And every day it became a little harder not to fall. Some people walk into a room. Elias Hart walked into a rumor. The shuttle touched down at 0900 hours. By 0902, half the fleet had decided fate was real. By 0905, the other half had started adding details. I hated everyone. You're staring, Finn said. I'm observing. You're staring professionally? Exactly. That's not a thing. Unfortunately, he wasn't entirely wrong. It was difficult not to stare when the entire hangar seemed focused on a single person. White hair. White ears. White tail. Elias Hart descended the shuttle ramp with the calm confidence of someone completely unaware he'd just become the center of every conversation in the fleet. Or maybe he was aware and simply didn't care. Either way, it was irritating. No way. Somebody whispered behind us. That's him. Has to be. White fur. Omega. What are the odds? Nobody needed to explain who they meant. Everyone knew the story. Years ago, Commander Cash-in Wolf had been saved by a mysterious white-furred Omega. Years later, he was still searching for answers. Nobody knew a name. Nobody knew a face. Nobody knew exactly what happened. They only knew 3 facts. White fur. Omega. Commander Wolf never forgot. And now a white-furred Omega had just arrived aboard a special transfer approved directly by Fleet Command. The rumors practically wrote themselves. This is ridiculous, I muttered. Absolutely, Finn agreed. The betting pool started before he reached the bottom of the ramp. The what? 5 credits says they get married before winter. Finn. Not my bet. People are insane. Correct. The worst part wasn't the rumors. The worst part was what came next. That's Elias Hart. 2 officers walked past us. The Hart family? Yeah. No wonder. Youngest strategic analyst ever accepted into command operations. I heard his grandfather was a fleet marshal. His father's a senator. And he's an Omega. First openly Omega analyst assigned to command in over a decade. My stomach twisted. Finn immediately noticed. Don't what? Whatever you're thinking. I wasn't thinking anything. Rowan. Fine. I folded my arms. Maybe I'm thinking it's convenient. Convenient. Brilliant. Famous family. Special transfer. Command assignment. Finn stared at me. You sound jealous. I am not jealous. You absolutely are. I'm evaluating circumstances. You're jealous professionally. That's not a thing. Neither is suspicious pudding, and yet here we are. I ignored him. Mostly because part of me hated how close he was to the truth. Elias wasn't the problem. In fact, Elias seemed annoyingly perfect. He thanked the dock crew unloading his luggage. Introduced himself to technicians. Remembered names after hearing them once. Smiled at everyone. The universe had somehow created a genuinely nice person and then dropped him directly into my worst week. Then Finn said something that ruined my mood completely. You know what's funny? Nothing involving you. You're both Omegas. My smile vanished. Finn immediately looked regretful. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Because we both knew the difference. Elias arrived openly. Proudly. His personnel file identified him as Omega. Everyone knew it. Nobody cared. Nobody questioned whether he belonged here. Nobody expected him to hide. Meanwhile, I had spent 10 years pretending to be someone else. 10 years of suppressants. 10 years of fake records. 10 years of monitoring every instinct, every scent fluctuation, every accidental mistake. One bad day could destroy everything I'd built. Elias never had to worry about any of that. Together they make quite a picture. The officers from earlier were still talking. I followed their gaze. Cashin stood near the shuttle ramp speaking with Elias. Nothing unusual. Nothing inappropriate. Just two professionals discussing work. Yet somehow the sight bothered me anyway. Commander Wolf and Elias Hart, one officer said. If the rumors are true, that's practically destiny. They walked away laughing. I stood perfectly still. Ignore them, Finn said quietly. Trying. The problem was that I couldn't. Because for the first time, comparison felt unavoidable. Elias was talented. Accomplished. Respected. Connected. Openly Omega. Everything the system rewarded. Everything I'd never been allowed to be. And I hated myself a little for caring. Because Elias hadn't done anything wrong. He wasn't arrogant. He wasn't rude. He wasn't trying to steal anyone. He was simply living the life I'd never been permitted to have. By lunchtime, my mood had deteriorated significantly. You're glaring at pudding. Finn sounded genuinely concerned. It's suspicious. It's vanilla pudding. Exactly. That doesn't mean anything. You don't know that. Before he could argue further, my communicator vibrated. Commander Wolf, wrong table. My heart immediately betrayed me. Rowan, excuse me? Commander Wolf, you're avoiding me. Rowan, I'm eating lunch. Commander Wolf, at the wrong table. Rowan, that's not how tables work. Commander Wolf, coward. I hated him. 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from him, which weakened my argument considerably. You're impossible, I informed him. You came. That's not the point. You still came. Before I could answer, another chair slid out. Elias sat beside Cashin. Of course he did. Apparently the universe was committed to a theme. Today, Lieutenant Ashford. Elias smiled. Rowan. Right. Sorry. Still learning names. You've been here 6 hours. I like learning quickly. Of course he did. Then he glanced toward Cashin. The commander was just telling me about you. My soul left my body. What? Across the table, Cashin calmly continued eating. He handled the navigation incident last year, Elias said. The report was impressive. Slowly, I turned toward Cashin. Commander. Yes. Why? Genuine confusion crossed his face. Why what? Why were you talking about me? He asked who our best analyst was. And I answered. My ears immediately turned warm. Finn nearly died laughing from another table. You can't just say things like that. Why not? Because hearing him praise me felt embarrassingly good. Because it mattered far more than it should have. Because Elias was looking at both of us with increasing amusement. Interesting, Elias murmured. Don't. I didn't say anything. You were about to. Fair. By evening, I had almost convinced myself I was overreacting. Then I walked past command and heard voices through a partially open door. Cashin. Elias. I should have kept walking. Instead, I stopped. Thank you for coming, Cashin was saying. I've spent years looking for answers. My heartbeat stumbled painfully. Inside the office, Elias answered something too quietly to hear. Then Cashin spoke again. I was hoping you could help. Answers. Years. Help. The words echoed through my mind. Suddenly, every rumor from the last 12 hours sounded horribly reasonable. The white-furred Omega. The years of searching. The special transfer. The personal welcome. The impossible coincidence. I knew I should stay. I knew there was probably a logical explanation. Instead, I turned around and walked away. Because for the first time since Cashin Wolf admitted he was courting me, a terrible thought had begun whispering through the back of my mind. What if everyone else was right? And what if I was only standing in a place that had always belonged to someone else? The problem with deciding to avoid someone is that it only works if the other person cooperates. Commander Cashin Wolf did not cooperate. The morning after I overheard his conversation with Elias, I arrived at operations 30 minutes early, took the longest route possible, and selected a workstation hidden behind 3 monitors and a storage cabinet. It was a flawless plan. It failed within 8 minutes. Good morning, Rowan. I looked up. Elias smiled warmly. Good morning. I brought coffee. Why? You looked tired yesterday. I stared suspiciously at the cup he offered. Are you always like this? Like what? Friendly. I try. That's disturbing. Elias laughed. Actually laughed. Commander said you were funny. My soul immediately left my body. Commander said what? Funny. Commander Wolf used that word? More or less. You're lying. I am not. Unfortunately, he looked far too sincere to be lying. The worst part was that Elias genuinely seemed to like everyone. By lunchtime, he knew half the department by name, had helped 2 junior analysts with a software issue, and somehow convinced an irritated logistics officer to smile. It was unnatural. He's impossible to hate, I complained. Finn looked delighted. That's the problem? Yes. Not the fact you're spiraling? I'm not spiraling. You spent 20 minutes watching him help people organize files. It was suspiciously efficient. Everything is suspicious to you lately. Before I could defend myself, movement near the cafeteria entrance caught my attention. Cashin had arrived. Unfortunately, so had Elias. There, Finn said immediately. Look. I'm not looking. You're already looking. He wasn't wrong. Cashin paused beside Elias. Said something quietly. Elias laughed. Then, to my absolute horror, Cashin handed him his own access tablet. What are they doing? I muttered. Talking. Why is he lending him his tablet? Maybe because they're working together. Or maybe, don't. I wasn't going to say anything. You absolutely were. I hated that he knew me so well. The truly terrible part came later. Operations held a strategy briefing that afternoon. Halfway through, one of the presentation systems crashed. Several analysts groaned. A technician was called. Before anyone could do anything, Elias calmly stood up, walked to the console, and fixed the problem in less than 2 minutes. The room erupted into applause. Show off, I muttered. You're impossible, Finn whispered. He literally solved the problem. Exactly. That was a compliment. I know. Then Cashin spoke from the front of the room. Good work, Specialist Hart. Elias smiled. Thank you, Commander. My mood immediately worsened. You're pouting, Finn informed me. I'm not. You absolutely are. I am evaluating workplace dynamics. You are jealous. Professional evaluation. Jealous. Professional. Jealous. Fine. I folded my arms. Maybe a little. Finn nearly fell out of his chair. By evening, I was exhausted. Not from work. From myself. Every time Elias appeared, my brain compared us. Every time Cashin spoke to him, I noticed. Every time the 2 of them stood together, the rumors echoed through my head. White fur. Omega. Years of searching. Fate. Destiny. Nonsense. Complete nonsense. So why couldn't I stop thinking about it? I was packing my things when someone knocked gently against my desk. Hey. Elias stood there holding 2 takeout containers. I accidentally ordered too much dinner. I narrowed my eyes. Nobody accidentally orders 2 full meals. You'd be surprised. I wouldn't. Fair. He smiled. Take 1 anyway. Why? Because you've skipped lunch twice this week. I froze. How do you know that? Commander mentioned it. Silence. Complete silence. Commander mentioned my eating habits? He seemed concerned. My heart betrayed me immediately. Then Elias added, honestly, it was kind of sweet. My heart stopped betraying me and started actively attacking me. Sweet. Very. Commander Wolf? Yes. The same Commander Wolf who once rejected a report because somebody used the wrong font. That's the one. Elias looked thoughtful. He talks about you a lot, you know. Every system in my body shut down. What? Mostly work. Mostly. He was definitely hiding something. Elias. Relax. His smile softened. Whatever story you've invented in your head, I promise it's probably wrong. My chest tightened. You don't know what story. I'm imagining. No. Elias glanced toward the corridor where Cashin's office was located. But I know the commander. You've known him for 2 days. And, annoyingly valid point. Before I could answer, another voice interrupted. Fox. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Cashin stood at the doorway, looking directly at me. Commander, I said. You're still here. I'm leaving. Good. I blinked. Good. You look tired. The concern in his voice was immediate. Natural. Unforced. Exactly the kind of thing I had spent all day convincing myself didn't mean anything. I'm fine. Liar. Elias looked between us, then very wisely stepped backward. Well, I suddenly remembered I have somewhere else to be. You don't, I said. I do now. And then he abandoned me. Traitor. Dinner. Cashin said once Elias disappeared. What about it? You still haven't agreed. You still haven't stopped asking. Correct. I stared at him. He stared back. Calm. Patient. Certain. As if the answer had never been in doubt. As if there had never been another possibility. As if there had never been anyone else. And for the first time all day, despite the rumors, despite Elias, despite every ridiculous fear in my head, I found myself wanting to believe him, which was infinitely more dangerous than jealousy had ever been. The moment I realized I was in trouble was when I started comparing every man in the fleet to Elias Hart, and somehow ended up angry at all of them. By the next morning, the entire station was infected. There was no other explanation. Half the officers were talking about Elias. The other half were talking to Elias. The maintenance crew liked him. The logistics department liked him. The analysts liked him. Even the grumpy chief engineer who hated everyone liked him. It was suspicious. Deeply suspicious. You're staring at the wall again, Finn said. I'm thinking. About Elias. About work. The wall isn't work. How do you know? Finn sighed. Rowan. What? You're jealous. I'm not. You spent 10 minutes yesterday investigating whether housing assignments are normally approved that quickly. That's called research. You compared his performance reviews to your own. Professional curiosity. You asked 3 people if white fur was overrated. That was science. You need help. Unfortunately, he was becoming difficult to argue with. The worst part was that Elias kept being nice. Every time I tried to find a reason to dislike him, he ruined it by doing something considerate. That morning alone, he helped a new recruit fix a scheduling error, brought coffee for an exhausted technician, and somehow convinced a stressed supply officer not to quit. Nobody should be that pleasant. It was unnatural. Around lunchtime, I finally escaped to archives for a few hours of peace. Unfortunately, peace was apparently unavailable. When I returned to the residential wing near the end of my shift, I immediately spotted Cashin and Elias. Together. Of course. You're kidding me, I muttered. They hadn't seen me. Yet. Which meant I still had time to leave. A smart person would have left. I stayed. Hidden behind a corner. Entirely for observational purposes. Cashin was carrying one of Elias's storage containers. Personally. The commander of fleet operations was carrying boxes. You know, Elias said, sounding amused. Most people just sign the housing approval forms. The housing office misplaced your paperwork twice. 3 times. Exactly. You intimidated them, didn't you? I clarified priorities. Elias laughed. A warm, familiar laugh. The kind people used around someone they trusted. My mood immediately worsened. Then something happened. Something small. Something completely harmless. Something that felt like a knife anyway. Elias reached up and brushed a piece of dust from Cashin's collar. A simple gesture. Casual. Familiar. Intimate. Cashin didn't pull away. Didn't seem surprised. Didn't even react. Like it was normal. Like it happened all the time. The air left my lungs. Then Elias smiled. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without you. Cashin's expression softened. Just slightly. Barely noticeable. Unless you'd spent months memorizing every expression he had. Family helps family, he said. Family. There was that word again. Family. Nobody ever explained it. Then disaster struck. Elias stepped. backward and caught his heel on a storage crate. He stumbled. Cashin moved instantly, one arm around Elias's waist, one hand catching his shoulder, pulling him upright before he could fall. For a second they were impossibly close. Elias's hand against Cashin's chest, Cashin's arm around his waist, their faces only inches apart. And suddenly, every rumor I'd spent 2 days trying to ignore crashed into me all at once. White fur, Omega, years of searching, special transfer, private meetings, housing approvals, family. Maybe they're right. The thought hit harder than I expected. Maybe everyone is right. Maybe he really is the Omega. Maybe that's why Cashin looked at him differently. Maybe that's why he personally welcomed him. Maybe that's why something inside me snapped. I turned around and walked away. Fast. Not running. Definitely not running. Fox. Cashin's voice followed immediately. I walked faster. Rowan. Faster. Fox. Even faster. Footsteps appeared behind me seconds later. Of course they did. Stop. I stopped. Mostly because if I kept going, dignity would officially be lost forever. Turning around, I folded my arms. What? Cashin stood a few feet away. Calm. Collected. Annoyingly handsome. What's wrong? Nothing. Liar. You say that a lot. Because you're very good at it. Shouldn't you be helping Elias? The words escaped before I could stop them. Cashin blinked. Once. Slowly. What? Excellent. Perfect. Wonderful. Now I sounded insane. Nothing. Fox. Go help him unpack. Silence. Dangerous silence. Cashin narrowed his eyes. Why? Because he needs help. He does not. Then spend time with him. Why would I do that? I don't know. Liar. I hated that word. Mostly because he was right. I'm not jealous. The second the sentence left my mouth, I wanted to launch myself into space. Cashin's eyebrow rose. Interesting. Forget I said that. No, Cashin. Fox. Don't. One corner of his mouth twitched. The bastard was enjoying this. Look at me. No, Rowan. No, Fox. I looked. Worst decision of my life. Because suddenly his expression changed. The amusement faded. The teasing vanished. Now he looked focused. Like a hunter finally spotting movement in tall grass. You think Elias and I are involved. It wasn't a question. Everyone thinks that. The words exploded out before I could stop them. Everyone talks about him. Cashin stayed silent, which somehow made it worse. White fur. I stepped forward. Openly Omega. Another step. Perfect resume. Another. Powerful family. Rowan, you spent years looking for a white-furred Omega. My voice cracked slightly. You personally welcomed him. You arranged his housing. You meet behind closed doors. You practically carry his luggage. Fox. And then I see you standing there holding him like. I stopped. Too late. Everything was already out. The hallway fell silent. Cashin stared at me, then rubbed a hand across his face. Not angry. Not offended. Just tired. What? I demanded. His shoulders shook once. Once. The man was laughing. Cashin. I'm trying very hard not to. You are impossible. Probably. Stop laughing. I haven't started yet. I hate you. No, you don't. The confidence in that answer was infuriating. Then another voice appeared behind him. Oh, wow. I closed my eyes. Of course. Of course it was Elias. When I opened them, the white wolf was standing there holding a storage box and looking delighted. Absolutely delighted. Should I leave? Yes, I said immediately. No. Cashin said at the same time. Elias grinned. Interesting. Go away. Absolutely not. He looked between us, then suddenly started laughing. Real laughter. Uncontrolled laughter. The traitor. What's so funny? I snapped. You thought. He pointed at himself. Then at Cashin. Then laughed even harder. That's incredible. Elias. Cashin sounded exhausted. I know, I know. Elias wiped a tear from one eye. Still laughing. Then looked directly at me. Commander Wolf didn't explain? Explain what? Elias blinked. I'm married. Silence. Complete silence. What? Very happily married. My brain stopped working. Married. For 3 years. I pointed helplessly at Cashin. To who? Elias's grin widened. His older brother. The corridor went completely silent. I stared at Elias. Then at Cashin. Then back at Elias. Then back. At Cashin. My soul quietly packed a suitcase and left. His brother? His older brother. Elias confirmed cheerfully. Which technically makes me family. Family. Actual family. Real family. Not mysterious romantic destiny family. Not hidden lover family. Family. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Cashin folded his arms and looked directly at me. So, my heart stopped. So, his smile appeared. Slow. Dangerous. Victorious. Are you finally going to admit you were jealous? Heat exploded across my face. Behind him, Elias immediately lost the battle against laughter again. That's not a no, he managed between breaths. Elias. Sorry. He absolutely wasn't sorry. Cashin never took his eyes off me. Well, I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. Preferably before tomorrow. Go to hell. Elias nearly dropped the box. Cashin's smile widened. And for the first time all day, I realized I was in far more trouble than jealousy had ever caused. The problem with finally getting what you want is that reality somehow feels less believable than the fantasy. For several long seconds after Elias casually informed me that he was married to Cashin's older brother, my brain simply stopped participating in events. Family. Actual family. Not mysterious destiny family. Not long-lost love family. Family. Elias looked entirely too pleased with himself. Cashin looked entirely too pleased with me. And I wanted to disappear. So, Cashin said again. Don't. Are you finally going to admit you were jealous? Go to hell. Behind him, Elias immediately doubled over laughing. That's still not a no. Elias. Sorry. He absolutely was not sorry. I should leave before this becomes embarrassing. It already became embarrassing 20 minutes ago, I informed him. Fair point. He grinned. Good luck, Rowan. Then he picked up his box and finally left. The traitor. The wonderful, terrible traitor. The moment he disappeared around the corner, the hallway became dangerously quiet. Cashin folded his arms and simply looked at me. Waiting. Patient. Certain. Like a hunter who already knew exactly where his prey was hiding. Stop that. Stop what? Looking. At me like that. Like what? Like you've won. One corner of his mouth lifted. Maybe I have. My heart immediately forgot how to function. You're impossible. You've mentioned that. Several times. And yet you're still here. Unfortunately, that was true. I was still there. Still standing in front of him. Still unable to walk away. Fox. His voice softened. Look at me. I did. Worst decision of my life. His eyes were warm. Not amused. Not teasing. Warm. Like sunlight. Like safety. Like home. There was never anyone else, he said quietly. Not Elias. Not anyone. My throat tightened. You don't know how stupid I feel right now. I have a rough idea. I accused you of flirting with your brother's husband. You did. Multiple times. Several. This memory is going to wake me up at 3 in the morning for the next 10 years. Cashin's smile widened. Probably. I groaned and covered my face. I hate everything. A hand gently caught my wrist and lowered it. No, my pulse immediately accelerated. No, not everything. Suddenly breathing became difficult. Cashin, why were you jealous? I stared at him. Seriously? Very. You're enjoying this. A little. You're awful. Answer the question. I should have lied. I wanted to lie. Unfortunately, those golden eyes made dishonesty nearly impossible. Because I thought. The words felt embarrassing already. Thought what? That eventually you would choose him. Silence. Fox. The tenderness in his voice nearly destroyed me. Why would I do that? Because he's perfect. The answer escaped before I could stop it. Cashin blinked. Perfect. Smart. I counted on my fingers. Talented. Nice. Attractive. Everybody likes him. Openly Omega. Powerful family. I shrugged helplessly. Compared to that, I'm just what? I looked away. Me. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Cashin stepped forward. Rowan. Don't. Look at me. Cashin. Look at me. Reluctantly, I did. His expression was completely serious now. You think I spent months chasing you because you were the only option? My face grew hotter. That's not what I meant. Good. His voice dropped lower. Because. I chose you. My heartbeat stumbled. You chose me because you're stubborn. That too. And slightly insane. Possibly. Your standards are questionable. Definitely. I laughed despite myself. Cashin watched me for a moment before asking quietly. Do you like me? Direct. Merciless. Typical Cashin. You already know the answer. I want to hear it. Why? Because I've waited months. My chest tightened. The sincerity in that answer stole every remaining defense. That's unfair. Probably. You keep saying that. Answer. I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man who had patiently pursued me for months. The man who remembered every small thing about me. The man who somehow made me feel seen even when I wanted to hide. Yes, I whispered. His eyes softened immediately. Yes, what? You know what? Fox. I groaned. I like you. Good. That's all. No, he stepped closer. What else? My heart was trying to escape through my throat. I like you a lot. The admission felt terrifying. Wonderful. Irreversible. Cashin stared at me for several seconds. Then something remarkable happened. Commander Cashin Wolf looked genuinely happy. Not composed. Not controlled. Happy. Say it again. Absolutely not. Fox. No, please. The word hit harder than any order ever could. My ears burned. My tail betrayed me immediately. I like you, I muttered. Still not enough. Greedy. Very. I should have said something clever. Something sarcastic. Something worthy of Rowan Ashford. Instead, I watched his gaze drop briefly to my lips, then return to my eyes. And suddenly neither of us was joking anymore. May I? He asked quietly. Nobody had ever asked me that before. The answer was already written across my face. Cashin's hand rose slowly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Gentle. Careful. Like I was something precious. Then he kissed me. Softly. Warmly. The world stopped. Every anxious thought. Every stupid fear. Every misunderstanding. Gone. There was only the feeling of his lips against mine and the realization that this was real. When he pulled back, I stared at him, completely speechless. Fox. I forgot how language works. The laugh that escaped him was unfairly attractive. Good. Then he kissed me again. Longer this time. Slow enough to make my knees weak. Patient enough to make my heart ache. By the third kiss, I had completely given up pretending to be functional. Cashin. People might see. Good. Good. I've spent months courting you. He pressed a kiss to my forehead. Then my temple. I'm done being subtle. My face felt approximately 1,000 degrees. You're impossible. Still here. He brushed his thumb against my cheek. Still chosen. The simple certainty in those words nearly melted me. Much later, after somehow escaping with most of my dignity destroyed beyond repair, I returned to my quarters. Or attempted to. The moment I opened the door, Finn looked up from his chair, then immediately looked down at my face, then at my tail, then back at my face. Wow. Don't. You got kissed. Finn. More than once. Finn. He grinned so hard I considered violence. Finally, I dropped onto the couch and buried my face in a cushion. I hate everyone. You look very happy for someone who hates everyone. The horrifying part was that he was right. I couldn't stop smiling. This is disgusting. Love usually is. Please stop talking. Did he confess? Yes. Did you confess? Yes. Did you kiss? Finn. That's a yes. I threw a cushion at him. He caught it effortlessly, still smiling. Then gradually the smile faded. Something serious replaced it. My stomach immediately dropped. Rowan. What? I'm happy for you. The warmth in his voice was genuine. Really? Thank you. But there it was. The word that ruined everything. Finn. He still thinks you're a beta. The happiness vanished like someone had switched off a light. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Real. Finn looked at me carefully. Cashin Wolf isn't just your boyfriend now. My chest tightened. I know. Eventually you're going to have to tell him the truth. The truth. The fake registration. The forged records. The decade of pretending. The secret that could destroy everything I had just gained. And for the first time that night, fear returned. The more Cashin cared about me, the harder it became to breathe around the truth. If someone had told me a month ago that Commander Cashin Wolf would spend his free time researching foxes on the internet, I would have laughed in their face. If someone had told me he would then use that research to repeatedly embarrass himself, I would have paid money to watch it happen. Unfortunately, reality turned out to be much stranger. What's this? I asked, staring suspiciously at the package sitting on my desk. A message appeared on my communicator almost immediately. Snack. I frowned. That explains absolutely nothing. 3 dots appeared. Then another message. Internet said foxes like it. My stomach immediately hurt from trying not to laugh. Cashin. Yes. This is dog food. Silence. A very long silence. Then, it had a fox on the package. I buried my face in my hands. Across the office, Finn nearly choked to death laughing. What happened? Nothing. That sounded like trauma. He's trying. That's somehow worse. Unfortunately, Finn was right. Cashin was trying. Very hard. The problem was that Cashin approached romance the same way he approached military strategy. He researched. He prepared. He gathered information. And then occasionally reached catastrophically incorrect conclusions. 3 days earlier, he had sent me an article titled 10 Ways to Build Trust with Foxes. Last week, he had spent 20 minutes asking whether foxes preferred blankets of a specific texture. Yesterday, he had somehow fallen into an online discussion forum and emerged convinced that all foxes enjoyed being praised every 4 hours. Absolutely not, I had informed him. The internet disagrees. The internet is stupid. The internet has over 6,000 votes. The internet is 6,000 times stupid. He had actually laughed. The memory still made my chest warm. That was the dangerous part. Not the gifts. Not the messages. Not the constant attention. It was how easily happiness slipped past my defenses. Every morning, there was a message waiting for me. Every evening, there was another. Sometimes it was a reminder to eat. Sometimes a photograph of a sunset from a patrol vessel. Sometimes a simple, "Good luck today, Fox." Small things. Ridiculous things. Important things. The kind that slowly became part of your life before you realized it. "You look sick." Elias dropped into the chair beside my workstation. "Thank you." "No, I mean emotionally." "That's better somehow." Commander Wolf asked me for dating advice. I froze. Slowly. Carefully. "What?" Elias looked delighted. 3 separate times. "You're lying." "I wish." He opened his tablet. "I have evidence." My soul left my body when he showed me the messages. What constitutes too many good morning texts? How many compliments per week is normal? Do foxes like flowers? Oh my God, that was my reaction too. Please delete those. Never. Elias. I'm preserving history. I wanted to throw the tablet out of the nearest airlock. The terrifying part, Elias continued, is that he took notes. He did not. He absolutely did. You're making that up. I watched him write things down. I covered my face. I need a new life. You need a camera? Why? Because nobody would believe this otherwise. The worst thing was that I could picture it perfectly. Cashin Wolf, decorated commander, brilliant strategist, secretly taking notes on how many compliments a boyfriend should receive. My tale betrayed me immediately. Elias pointed. There it is. What? The wag. There is no wag. There is absolutely a wag. Leave. You adore him. Leave. This is the happiest I've ever seen you. That answer hit harder than it should have. Because he wasn't wrong. Somewhere along the way, I had become happy. Not occasionally. Not temporarily. Consistently. The realization should have felt wonderful. Instead, it scared me. Every day Cashin trusted me a little more. Every day I trusted him a little more. Every day the truth became harder to hide. Harder to explain. Harder to survive. The feeling followed me through the rest of the week. Through shared meals. Through stolen kisses in quiet corridors. Through every casual touch that still made my pulse misbehave. It followed me all the way to the command observation lounge one evening after duty hours. The station lights glittered beyond the reinforced glass. Cargo. Ships drifted slowly through the darkness. For once, the room was empty except for the two of us. Cashin sat beside me reviewing reports. I pretended to review mine. Pretended very badly. You've read the same page for 10 minutes. I didn't look up. It's a complicated page. It's upside down. I immediately flipped it over. I knew that. Of course. His amusement was becoming a problem. Fox. What's wrong? There it was again. The impossible ability he had to notice everything. Nothing. Liar. I'm developing an allergy to that word. Then stop earning it. Rude. Accurate. Annoyingly attractive. We sat quietly for a while. The comfortable kind of silence. The dangerous kind. The kind that made honesty feel possible. Before I could stop myself, I asked, "Can I ask something?" Always. The answer came so quickly my chest tightened. Hypothetically. Dangerous beginning. If someone on your team wasn't completely honest about their past, Cashin didn't interrupt. Didn't rush me. Just waited. Would depend on why. That wasn't the answer I expected. Not what they lied about. No, he set the report aside. People hide things for different reasons. His voice remained calm. Thoughtful. Fear. Shame. Family. Survival. My heartbeat became uncomfortable. And if it was something serious? then I'd want the truth. The knot in my chest tightened, even if it changed how you saw them. Finally, he turned toward me, his expression completely serious now. Everyone disappoints someone eventually. I looked down. That's reassuring. It's realistic. A faint smile touched his mouth, then disappeared. Trust isn't built by perfection. His voice softened. It's built when someone chooses honesty, even though honesty is difficult. For one terrifying second, I wondered if he somehow knew. If he'd discovered everything already. If this conversation wasn't hypothetical at all. But then his hand found mine. Warm, steady, familiar. Whatever it is, he said quietly. I trust you. My breath caught. Cashin squeezed my fingers gently. Even if you have secrets. The words struck harder than any accusation could have. Because they weren't suspicion. They weren't pressure. They were faith. And somehow that hurt far more. He trusted me completely. While I was still lying to him every single day. Cashin, my voice sounded strange. The truth rose all the way to the edge of my tongue. One sentence. That was all it would take. One sentence to tell him everything. One sentence to risk losing everything. I couldn't do it. Not yet. Instead, I leaned forward and kissed him. Softly. Briefly. A coward's distraction. Unfortunately, Cashin was smarter than that. Nice attempt. What? Changing the subject. Did it work? Temporarily. I laughed despite myself. He kissed my forehead. Then my temple. Then the corner of my mouth. Whenever you're ready, Fox. Not if. Not when I find out. Whenever you're ready. The trust in those words followed me all the way back to my quarters. It followed me through the door. Followed me into the room. Followed me straight into Finn's line of sight. He looked up from the couch. Then at my face. Then at my tail. Then back at my face. Wow. Don't. You kissed him again. Finn. Multiple times. Finn. That's a yes. I threw a cushion at him. He caught it without effort. Smiling. You're impossible. And you're glowing. I am not glowing. You're basically a romantic lantern. I hated that he wasn't entirely wrong. The smile wouldn't leave my face. The warmth wouldn't leave my chest. For a few wonderful minutes I forgot everything else. Then Finn's smile slowly faded. My stomach immediately dropped. Rowan. What? I'm happy for you. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. Really? Thank you. But there it was. The word that ruined everything. Finn. He still thinks you're a beta. The warmth disappeared instantly. Silence settled over the room. Heavy. Real. Uncomfortable. Finn looked at me carefully. The longer this goes on, the worse it's going to hurt. My chest tightened. Because I already knew that. I know. Then tell him. I can't. You have to. I closed my eyes. Somewhere across the station, Cashin probably believed I was finally learning to trust him. And for the first time in 10 years, I desperately wanted to. Which somehow made the truth even harder to say. Dating Cashin Wolf would have been significantly less stressful if the man wasn't quietly territorial in ways that kept short-circuiting my brain. 3 weeks into our relationship, I discovered something dangerous about black panthers. They didn't need to bare their teeth to make other predators back away. Sometimes all it took was a hand resting casually against someone's lower back. Ashford. I looked up from the supply manifest in my hands. Lieutenant Carter leaned against the cargo crate beside me with the easy confidence of an alpha fully aware he was attractive. Blonde. Tall. Friendly. The kind of officer who flirted with literally everyone. You surviving preparation chaos? He asked. Barely. Understandable. His eyes dropped briefly toward the communicator clipped to my belt. Though judging by your face lately, I'd say something is improving your mood. Oh no. Maybe I just enjoy spreadsheets. That's the saddest answer I've ever heard. I snorted softly despite myself. Carter grinned immediately, clearly encouraged. Mistake. Big mistake. There it is, he said. You know, people get nervous around you because you're always sarcastic, but you're actually kind of cute when you smile. My brain stalled for exactly 1 second. Long enough to realize 2 things simultaneously. First, Carter was flirting. Second, someone had just walked up behind me. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Calm. Heavy. Dangerous. Carter noticed too. His posture subtly straightened before he even turned around. Lieutenant Carter. Cashin's voice remained perfectly polite, which was honestly worse. Commander. Carter stepped back automatically. Smart man. Cashin's hand settled lightly against my lower back as he stopped beside me. Not rough. Not aggressive. Barely even noticeable. But suddenly, every alpha instinct in the area understood exactly what that touch meant. Mine. My pulse immediately betrayed me. Is there a reason you're distracting Lieutenant Ashford during mission preparation? Cashin asked calmly. Carter blinked once. No, sir. Good. Silence. Terrible silence. Cashin's thumb brushed once against the fabric near my waist. Tiny movement. Almost invisible. Somehow devastating. Then I assume your preparation checklist is already complete. Almost, sir. Cashin's golden eyes held his for exactly 2 seconds. Then perhaps focus on finishing it. Carter practically fled. I watched him disappear around the corner before slowly turning toward the man beside me. That was insane. Cashin looked genuinely confused. What was that? I gestured vaguely toward the hallway where Carter had escaped with his survival instincts barely intact. You scared him. Good. Cashin. He was flirting with you. The immediate answer nearly short-circuited my nervous system again. You noticed that? Fox. Right. Stupid question. Still, I muttered weakly. You can't intimidate every alpha who talks to me. Cashin considered that seriously. Why not? Because that's unhinged behavior. He didn't look convinced. You know what's worse? I asked. What? The fact that part of me liked it. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Interesting. Don't start. Your heartbeat increased. Betrayed by my own body again. I hate everything. No, you don't. The worst part was that he sounded very certain about it. Before I could recover, another officer walked past us carrying equipment crates. Cashin's hand immediately disappeared from my back. Smooth. Casual. Professional again in less than a second. That was the dangerous thing about him. Control. Even when possessiveness slipped through, it never became messy. Never loud. Just small moments. Quiet touches. Calm warnings disguised as professionalism, which somehow made them far more dangerous. You know, Elias said later that evening while helping me inventory emergency medical supplies, the entire tactical division now believes Commander Wolf might kill someone over you. Fantastic. Personally, I think it's romantic. Personally, I think you're enjoying this too much. Absolutely. Elias didn't even pretend to deny it. Though I do admire how subtle he is. Subtle? Compared to most alphas? Elias looked genuinely thoughtful. Very. He wasn't wrong. That was the problem. Cashin never acted possessive for show. Never turned it into dominance theater. If anything, the gestures felt instinctive. Automatic. Like his body reacted before his brain decided whether it should. Which was arguably worse. The clearest example happened 2 hours later during final navigation review. Most of the command crew had already left the strategy room, leaving only me, Cashin, and several rotating holographic route projections. I leaned over the table studying emergency extraction coordinates, while Cashin reviewed shield integrity reports beside me. Quiet. Professional. Safe. Until I felt something brush lightly against the tip of my tail. I froze instantly. Cashin. His tone remained completely neutral, which meant he absolutely knew what he was doing. What are you doing? Standing. Your hand. Ah. He glanced downward as if only just noticing. Liar. Sorry. He did not sound sorry. Warm fingers brushed lightly through the fur near the end of my tail again. Slow. Brief. Hidden safely beneath the edge of the holographic table where no one else could see. My entire spine threatened mutiny. You can't just do that suddenly, I whispered. Cashin finally looked at me directly. Calm golden eyes. Completely unfair face. Why not? Because my brain stops working. He considered that for several seconds. Useful. I stared at him in disbelief while he returned to reviewing reports like he hadn't just admitted psychological warfare. You're unbelievable. You like it? Heat immediately climbed into my face. Cashin's eyes narrowed slightly in satisfaction. Thought so. You're getting way too confident. Should I stop? The question caught me completely off guard. Real question. Genuine. No teasing underneath it. My heartbeat stumbled. Because the answer came far too quickly. No. Something warm flickered across his expression. Soft enough that most people would have missed it. I didn't. Cashin stepped closer beside me. Not touching now. Just close enough that warmth radiated from him. Good, he said quietly. Then, after a brief pause, your tail is expressive. I closed my eyes. Please never say that sentence again. It reacts whenever you're embarrassed. Cashin. Or flustered. Cashin. Or when you want me to touch it again. I nearly walked directly into the holographic table. The low laugh that escaped him afterward was deeply unfair. "You're terrible." "And yet," he murmured near my ear, "you still moved closer." My soul briefly left my body. Somewhere outside the strategy room, station alarms signaled final boarding preparations. Neither of us moved immediately. "Serious question," I muttered weakly after several dangerous seconds. Does your family have some kind of concerning obsession with white fur?" Cashin blinked once. "What? Your brother married a white wolf." I pointed at myself. "You're dating a white fox." Silence. Then, horrifyingly, Cashin actually considered the possibility. "Interesting pattern." "Cashin, in my defense," he said calmly, "I liked you before I realized you were fluffy." I buried my face in my hands while he quietly laughed under his breath. Then suddenly the laughter stopped. The shift was immediate. Subtle, but sharp enough that my instincts reacted before my brain did. Cashin had gone still. Not emotionally still. Predator still. My pulse faltered. Cashin. For one brief second, heat flickered through the air around him. Sharp. Heavy. Alpha pheromones. Stronger than usual. Gone almost instantly. Cashin blinked once like he'd felt it too. Then his expression smoothed back into calm control. "Nothing," he said quietly. But something about the tension in his shoulders felt wrong. Very wrong. Before I could ask further, red warning lights suddenly flashed across the station walls. Final departure authorization. Mission launch. And deep beneath all the warmth and happiness sitting inside my chest, unease twisted sharply through my instincts. Because something about that brief moment felt like the beginning of a disaster. People think survival is about strength. It isn't. Survival is about who can still think clearly while everything around them is falling apart. The first warning appeared 3 hours after entering Helios drift. Navigation drift at 0.03%. One of the pilots reported from the command deck. At first, nobody reacted much. Minor. Instability was expected inside magnetic storm territory. Helios drift had always been infamous for interference. But then another warning appeared. Then another. Long-range communications briefly failed before reconnecting again. Internal lighting flickered twice during routine diagnostics. One of the engineers quietly muttered something about electromagnetic fluctuations exceeding projected models. That was when the atmosphere aboard the cruiser began changing. Not panic. Not yet. Just tension. Professional tension. The kind that spreads slowly through experienced crews when everyone senses something is wrong before they can prove it. Through all of it, Cashin Wolf remained completely calm. Reroute secondary stabilizers. Reduce engine strain by 12%. Run manual diagnostics on external navigation. Every order came sharp. Immediate. Controlled. No wasted movement. No wasted emotion. He stood at the center of the command deck while warning lights flashed red across nearby consoles. Black uniform immaculate despite the growing instability around him. Watching him work was dangerous in ways completely unrelated to romance. Because this was the version of Cashin people feared. Commander Wolf. The man capable of making decisions in seconds while everyone else was still processing the problem. Storm density increasing ahead, the pilot warned. Recommend altering course. Cashin studied the forward display silently. Violent magnetic storms twisted across the sector like living black clouds, streaks of blue-white energy flashing through deep space. Negative, he answered calmly. The missing civilian ships disappeared inside this corridor. Sir, interference levels are becoming unstable. Noted. His voice never changed. Maintain course. The pilot obeyed immediately. Beside me, Elias leaned slightly closer and murmured quietly. You know what's terrifying? What? He gets calmer when things get worse. He wasn't wrong. The more unstable the situation became, the sharper Cashin seemed. Like pressure refined him instead of breaking him. Another violent tremor suddenly shook the cruiser, hard enough to throw several crew members sideways. Warning alarms immediately blared across the deck. We just lost external sensor array 3. Backup systems aren't responding. Communications degrading again. Multiple voices started overlapping at once. Cashin cut through all of them immediately. Enough. Silence dropped instantly. Status reports one at a time. Calm. Controlled. Absolute authority. The room stabilized around him almost immediately. Crew returned to stations. Engineers stopped shouting over each other. Panic never fully formed because Cashin never allowed it to. Then the entire cruiser lurched sideways so violently the overhead lights exploded in showers of sparks. This time people actually yelled. Magnetic impact wave. Stabilizers offline. Port engine failure. Somewhere deep below deck, metal groaned with a horrible tearing sound. Commander, the pilot shouted. We're losing trajectory control. Cashin steadied himself against the nearest console while golden eyes scanned rapidly across failing system displays. Calculating. Predicting. Deciding. How long until total engine collapse? Maybe 4 minutes. Too long. His answer came instantly. Then louder. Emergency descent procedure. My pulse spiked immediately. The pilot stared at him. Sir, there's no safe landing zone. Find me something survivable. Another impact slammed through the cruiser. Harder this time. Half the deck lights died instantly while smoke poured from a burning console near the rear wall. Crew members scrambled through flashing emergency lighting as warning sirens screamed overhead. Through all of it, Cashin's voice never rose once. Seal lower deck blast doors. Redirect emergency power to navigation. Prepare all personnel for impact. Someone nearby whispered weakly, holy shit. Honestly, same. Because this wasn't luck anymore. Cashin was dragging the entire ship through disaster through sheer force of control. Ice ridge ahead, the pilot yelled suddenly. The forward display revealed jagged black mountains coated in thick mineral ice rising through the storm below. To the right, a canyon filled with unstable magnetic surges. To the left, solid rock and frozen ridges. Collision either way. Cashin made the decision instantly. Take the ridge. Sir, the ice will absorb part of the impact. Another violent tremor nearly threw everyone off their feet. Now, the pilot obeyed immediately. The cruiser angled sharply downward toward the frozen ridge while the entire hull screamed around us. Alarms reached deafening levels. Systems failed one after another across the deck. Brace positions. Cashin barked. Impact in 15 seconds. Crew members moved instantly. I locked emergency restraints into place beside the tactical console while my heart hammered violently against my ribs. Across the deck, Cashin still stood near Central Command, completely steady despite the collapsing ship around him. Commander, one officer shouted desperately. You need to secure yourself. Cashin ignored him completely. Impact in 10. Another crew member lost balance as the deck tilted. Cashin caught him before he hit the floor, shoved him toward secured seating, then continued issuing commands like nothing had happened. Impact in 7. The cruiser plunged fully into the storm layer. Outside the windows, everything vanished into white static and violent flashes of blue energy. Impact in 5. Metal screamed somewhere behind us. Impact in 3. Then Cashin looked directly toward the crew, toward every terrified person aboard the dying cruiser. His voice cut through the alarms with terrifying certainty. Nobody dies today. And somehow, I believed him. The cruiser hit the ridge. The impact felt like the universe itself splitting apart. Metal shrieked violently. Gravity vanished for one horrifying second before slamming back hard enough to crush the air from my lungs. The ship skidded sideways across ice and rock while entire sections of the hull exploded outward in sparks and fire. Everything became noise. Alarms. Breaking metal. Shouting. Then suddenly, stillness. Smoke drifted through the ruined command deck beneath flickering red emergency lights. My ears rang painfully. Every part of my body hurt. Somewhere nearby, someone groaned weakly. Then Cashin's voice cut through the wreckage immediately. Damage report. Not panic. Not relief. Duty first. Survivors began answering one by one through coughing and static. Multiple injuries. Engine collapse. Fire spreading across lower decks. Evacuation, one officer asked hoarsely. Cashin looked once toward the failing reactor display, then toward the burning corridor behind us. Immediately, the crew moved at once. Injured personnel were dragged toward emergency exits. Supply crates ripped from damaged compartments. Medical kits. Portable generators. Emergency rations. Anything salvageable before the cruiser completely died. Cashin somehow seemed everywhere at once. Pulling trapped crew members from debris. Organizing evacuation routes. Carrying an injured technician himself when medics became overwhelmed. The entire operation moved with brutal efficiency, because everyone trusted him completely. Then one of the engineers froze while staring at a reactor monitor. "Commander," his voice sounded terrified. "The core's destabilizing." Silence hit instantly. Cashin reacted first. "How long?" "Maybe 2 minutes." "Everybody out." This time real panic threatened to break loose. Cashin shut it down immediately. "Move." His voice cracked across the wreckage like gunfire. "Essential supplies only. Leave everything else." Smoke thickened rapidly around us as survivors poured through emergency exits into the freezing storm outside. Snow and ash blasted violently across the mountainside. Behind us, the cruiser groaned like a dying animal. I turned once while helping Finn drag supply containers through the snow. The ship looked catastrophic, nearly torn apart across the ice ridge. Flames burning through multiple decks. "Rowan." I looked up immediately. Cashin stood near the emergency hatch helping the final survivors escape. Still counting personnel. Still making sure nobody got left behind, even with the ship literally dying around him. "Commander, move," someone shouted desperately. Only after the last crew member cleared the hatch did Cashin finally jump down into the snow himself. 3 seconds later, the cruiser exploded. Heat and force slammed across the ridge hard enough to knock several people forward. Fire erupted upward into the storm-dark sky while burning. Metal rained across the frozen mountainside. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. We all just stared at the burning wreckage. Our ship was gone. Completely gone. Elias finally broke the silence first. "I would like to officially state," he coughed into the freezing wind, "that this mission has become significantly less enjoyable." Somehow, a few exhausted people actually laughed. Shock laughter. Survival laughter. The kind that only happens after people realize they survived something they absolutely should not have survived. Cashin quickly scanned the remaining survivors. Counting. Assessing. Confirming everyone made it out alive. Only after verifying that did his shoulders lower slightly for the first time all day. Just slightly. "Move," he ordered calmly. "We need shelter before the storm worsens." And just like that, everyone moved again. Because if Cashin Wolf was still standing, still thinking, still leading, then maybe survival was still possible too. The abandoned relay station sat less than 1 kilometer away through the storm. And the night inside Helios Drift was only beginning. The worst part about watching someone slowly break down is realizing they'll keep smiling at you while they do it. By the 5th day trapped inside Helios Drift, exhaustion had settled over the relay shelter like a living thing. The station barely functioned even after emergency repairs. Half the heating grid failed every few hours during magnetic surges. Water filtration worked inconsistently. Food rationing had become severe enough that most meals now happened in silence. Outside, magnetic storms screamed endlessly across the frozen mountains. Inside, people survived through routine alone. Repair shifts, medical rotations, emergency maintenance, sleep whenever possible. Repeat. And through all of it, Cashin Wolf somehow kept the entire shelter standing through sheer force of will. Even after the crash, even after days without proper rest, he still moved through the station like exhaustion was something that happened to other people. Organizing repairs, managing supplies, personally checking injured crew members whenever the medics became overwhelmed. Nobody questioned him anymore. Not because of rank, because everyone trusted him completely. "I'm starting to think Commander Wolf physically cannot die," Elias muttered quietly while helping reinforce one of the damaged corridor doors. "Please don't challenge the universe like that," Finn answered immediately. "That's how people die in survival stories." Honestly, fair concern, because even I had started noticing things. Cashin moved slower now when he thought nobody was watching. Sometimes he paused briefly in empty corridors like he needed 1 second to steady himself before continuing. Dark exhaustion lingered beneath his eyes no matter how composed he looked in front of everyone else. And sometimes, only for a second, his expression would tighten sharply like he was fighting through pain before smoothing back into calm control almost immediately. But he kept going anyway. Of course he did. Men like Cashin treated themselves like equipment. Useful until failure. The first time I realized how bad it had gotten was during evening ration distribution. Shelter temperatures had dropped again after another generator failure, and people crowded close to the heating units while waiting for food packs. Cashin stood near the supply table reviewing inventory reports while still somehow answering questions from 3 different officers at once. He looked exhausted. Worse than exhausted. Running entirely on discipline. Without really thinking, I walked over and held out one of the thermal packs medical teams had been saving. Take it. Cashin looked up immediately. You need it more. I already have one. That was a lie. Obviously. His eyes narrowed slightly like he knew it too. For 1 second, the commander mask slipped just enough for exhaustion to show underneath. Then he quietly took the pack from my hand anyway. Our fingers brushed briefly during the exchange. Tiny contact. Barely anything. But his entire body went still for half a second afterward. So subtle most people probably wouldn't notice. I did. Cashin's gaze lifted toward mine briefly. Something unreadable flickered there before he stepped back again almost immediately. Distance. Deliberate distance. The realization had been bothering me for days now. He kept avoiding physical contact with me specifically. Still no communication with headquarters? One of the engineers asked late that evening inside the shelter's communications room. Storm interference keeps collapsing long-range transmission. Another technician answered tiredly. Earliest estimate. Silence. Then, maybe several more days. Nobody liked that answer. The room felt heavier afterward. More trapped. Cashin stood near the damaged console beneath flickering blue emergency lights, listening silently. Keep trying, he finally said. His voice still sounded calm. Still controlled. But rougher now. Like every word required slightly more effort than before. The engineer nodded immediately. Yes, Commander. Cashin turned away afterward, one hand briefly bracing against the edge of the console. Small movement. Easy to miss. Elias noticed instantly. So did I? The White Wolf's ears lowered slightly. That's not good, he murmured quietly. Later that night, I found Cashin alone in one of the empty maintenance corridors. Or rather, collapsed against the wall pretending he wasn't exhausted. His head rested briefly against cold metal while one hand pressed hard against his eyes. For the first time since the crash, he actually looked human. Tired. Burned out. Breakable. My chest tightened painfully at the sight. You're supposed to be sleeping, I said quietly. Cashin lowered his hand immediately. The exhaustion vanished behind comm control so fast, it almost felt unfair. So are you. Deflection. Observation. I walked closer anyway. You haven't slept properly in days. Neither has anyone else. That's not an answer. For a second, he just looked at me silently beneath the dim emergency lights. Then finally, people are scared. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. If I stop moving, they'll start thinking we're not getting out of here. Something in my chest hurt unexpectedly hard at that. Because of course that was what worried him. Not himself. Never himself. I stepped closer before thinking too hard about it. Cashin. He looked up slightly. Then instinct took over before caution. Could. My fingers brushed lightly against the burned edge of his sleeve where the fabric had melted during the crash. Small gesture. Careful. Quiet. Cashin froze instantly beneath the contact. For 1 second, something dangerously intense flickered across his expression before he forced it away again. Then very gently, almost reluctantly, he caught my wrist. Not tight. Not possessive. Just enough to stop me. Fox. His voice had gone rough somehow. Go sleep. I should have listened. Instead, I looked at him standing there exhausted beneath the flickering lights, still trying to carry the entire shelter on his back alone, and quietly answered the truth instead. You look terrible. A startled laugh escaped him unexpectedly. Small. Tired. Real. Probably the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him in days. That's incredibly romantic. I'm serious. I know. Silence settled softly between us after that. Not awkward. Just tired. Then Cashin released my wrist slowly and stepped back again. Distance. Deliberate distance. There it was again. Before I could ask about it, emergency alarms suddenly blared through the station. Medical alerts. Every muscle in Cashin's body tightened instantly. Then one of the medics appeared breathless at the end of the corridor. Commander Wolf collapsed. For one horrible second, the world stopped moving. Cashin swore softly under his breath before straightening immediately. Commander mode snapped back into place through sheer instinct alone. Containment protocol, he ordered instantly. Now, chaos exploded across the shelter. By the time I reached the medical wing minutes later, reinforced quarantine barriers were already sealing shut, while medics rushed emergency equipment through the narrowing doors. Move, someone shouted. Isolation lockdown. The barrier doors slammed closed with a heavy metallic sound. Through the reinforced observation glass, I finally saw Cashin inside. Alive. Conscious. Thank God. But wrong. Deeply wrong. Sweat dampened the collar of his black uniform despite the freezing station temperatures. His breathing looked too controlled, too deliberate, and his eyes, golden, sharp, predatory in ways I had never seen before. The atmosphere itself felt dangerous now. Then I realized why. Pheromones. Thick alpha pheromones saturated the quarantine room strongly enough that even standing outside the barrier, several nearby betas already looked uncomfortable. One younger medic physically stepped backward instinctively. Cashin noticed immediately. Shame flickered across his expression so quickly most people missed it. I didn't. Everyone leave. He ordered from inside the isolation room. Even through the speaker system, his voice sounded rougher now. Lower. Dangerous in ways instinct understood immediately. The station doctor exhaled heavily beside the quarantine controls. Commander Wolf has entered rut. Silence hit the corridor instantly. One officer quietly swore under his breath. Another looked genuinely alarmed. Which was fair. Combat class alphas entering rut inside an isolated emergency shelter was not a small problem. Especially not one like Cashin Wolf. How early? One medic asked carefully. At least 2 weeks, the doctor answered grimly. The magnetic storms likely disrupted endocrine regulation. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Inside the quarantine room, Cashin closed his eyes briefly like he was physically restraining himself from snapping at everyone nearby. Suppressants? He asked immediately. The doctor hesitated. Destroyed during the crash. The corridor somehow became even more tense. Wonderful, Elias muttered softly. The doctor rubbed tiredly at his forehead before speaking again carefully. An Omega partner would significantly help stabilization. Every single person nearby immediately looked toward Elias. Absolutely not, Elias answered instantly. First, I'm married. Then his expression flattened slightly. Second, Rowan is his. Silence. Nobody argued with that. Inside the quarantine room, another pulse of alpha pheromones rolled outward hard enough that even the air itself suddenly felt heavier. Several people instinctively stepped farther away from the barrier. Cashin noticed that too. His jaw tightened violently. Everybody leave the corridor, he ordered immediately. Now. Nobody moved quickly enough. Now. Officers. Medics. Engineers. Everyone immediately started clearing the hallway. Everyone except me. Finn grabbed my wrist sharply before I could move closer to the quarantine doors. His face looked pale now. Rowan. I looked toward Cashin again through the reinforced glass. Even sitting perfectly still, he radiated restraint so intense it looked painful. Every muscle in his body seemed locked under forced control. And suddenly, horrifyingly, I understood something. He wasn't afraid of the rut itself. He was afraid of hurting someone during it. Hurting me. Near the quarantine controls, the doctor hesitated before speaking carefully. A normal beta cannot safely tolerate prolonged exposure to a combat alpha in full rut. Silence settled heavily through the corridor. My pulse hammered once. Hard. Elias slowly looked toward me. Finn's grip tightened around my wrist. And suddenly I realized there was no future left where I kept lying after this. Not anymore. Not now. Slowly, I pulled free from Finn's grip. Then I looked toward the doctor. That's because I'm not exactly a beta. Complete silence. The doctor frowned immediately. Your medical records say otherwise. 10 years. 10 years hiding this. 10 years surviving as someone else. My differentiation was abnormal, I said carefully. Early screenings classified me beta with omega differentiation tendencies. The doctor's expression sharpened immediately with suspicion. That still wouldn't explain tolerating his pheromones this long. Silence. Then very slowly, my hands tightened once at my sides. Fear crawled painfully beneath my skin. Because there was no taking this back afterward. No hiding again. Not after tonight. I closed my eyes briefly. Then finally stopped suppressing. Warmth spread softly through the cold corridor air. Sweet. Gentle. Omega pheromones. Real omega pheromones. Silence hit instantly. One medic stared openly. Another looked genuinely shocked. Finn closed his eyes briefly like a man finally watching the inevitable happen. Elias just whispered softly, well, that explains literally everything. Inside the quarantine room, Cashin reacted immediately. His entire body locked still. Completely still. For the first time since anyone here had met him, Real shock cracked through his composure. Golden eyes lifted sharply toward me through the reinforced glass. Rowan. My name sounded rough in his voice now. Almost painful. I stepped toward the quarantine barrier anyway. Immediately, the atmosphere changed again. The alpha pheromones inside the room sharpened violently in response to mine. Several people physically retreated farther down the corridor instinctively. Cashin noticed instantly. His entire body went rigid. Don't. His voice dropped low enough to send chills down my spine. Leave. I stopped directly beside the barrier doors anyway. Cashin, I'm serious. For the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely shaken. Not angry. Not aggressive. Terrified. You don't understand what Rut does to people. His hands tightened violently against the edge of the medical bed. I could hurt you. The honesty in his voice hurt worse than shouting ever could. Because he meant it. Every instinct in him was trying to protect me from himself. I swallowed hard once. Then finally told him the truth I had hidden for 10 years. You won't. Silence. My pulse hammered painfully. Because I'm your Omega too. Outside, Helios drift screamed against the frozen mountains while emergency lights flickered dimly overhead. Inside the corridor, nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Then slowly, very slowly, I looked toward the quarantine controls. Open the barrier. Cashin's expression changed instantly. No, the word came out rough. Immediate. Desperate. Rowan, don't. But I was already stepping closer to the sealed quarantine doors anyway. You don't have to go through this alone, I whispered softly. Cashin spent years believing discipline could overpower instinct. Helios drift was where he finally learned that some things were never meant to be endured alone. The moment Rowan's Omega pheromones filled the isolation room, something inside Cashin finally gave out. Not his control, not his mind, just the brutal tension he had been holding himself together with for days. His entire body went still before one rough breath escaped him, like he had finally remembered how to breathe properly again. Outside the barrier, the doctor stared openly at the monitors. His stress response is stabilizing. Elias crossed his arms calmly. Told you. Rowan barely heard them. His attention stayed fixed entirely on the man sitting in front of him, looking exhausted enough to collapse all over again. Golden eyes followed Rowan's every movement now with dangerous intensity, but the violence from earlier was gone. In its place remained something hotter. Needier. Fox. Cashin muttered hoarsely. You really shouldn't be here. Rowan stepped closer anyway. Too late now. Cashin looked like he wanted to argue. Then Rowan carefully touched his face. That was it. The last thread of resistance finally snapped apart. Cashin lowered his forehead against Rowan's shoulder with a rough exhale, while both hands gripped tightly at Rowan's waist like contact itself had become necessary for survival. Relief flooded the room instantly. Not hunger. Not aggression. Relief. Rowan slowly wrapped his arms around him while Cashin buried his face against his neck and inhaled shakily, like Rowan's scent was the first real thing he had touched in days. You idiot, Rowan whispered softly into his hair. You were seriously planning to survive this alone? Cashin laughed weakly under his breath. That was the idea. Terrible idea. Probably. The first night blurred together afterward. Heat. Pheromones. Exhaustion. Rowan quickly learned that Cashin became clingy during the worst waves of rut. Not violent. Not dangerous. Just desperately tactile, like instinct kept reaching for Rowan before thought could catch up. Hands at his waist. Fingers tangled tightly in his shirt. Face buried against his throat, while breathing slowly became easier again. And Rowan let him. Every single time. Somewhere during the middle of the night, Cashin pulled Rowan into his lap with enough instinctive confidence that Rowan barely had time to react before strong arms wrapped securely around him. Cashin, Rowan muttered, already flushed. You're heavy. You like me heavy. Rowan immediately choked on air. Cashin actually smirked against his throat afterward. Cute. Shut up. Make me. Rowan did. Try pushing him away after that. Unfortunately, combat alphas and Rut were apparently unfairly strong. By the second morning, the isolation room smelled overwhelmingly like both of them. Blankets tangled somewhere near the floor. Rowan's borrowed jacket hanging halfway off the medical chair. Cashin asleep beside him with one arm still wrapped possessively around his waist, even unconscious. Rowan stared at the ceiling for several quiet seconds before realizing something terrifying. He felt safe. Safe enough to sleep beside an alpha in full rut. safe enough to wake up wrapped inside Cashin's scent without panic clawing up his throat. Safe enough that for the first time in years, he didn't hate the Omega scent clinging faintly to his own skin. The realization hit harder than expected. Cashin woke slowly beside him a few minutes later, golden eyes still hazy with exhaustion and lingering instinct. The second he noticed Rowan awake too, his hand tightened automatically around Rowan's waist like his body reacted before his brain did. Then embarrassment flickered briefly across his face. Sorry. Rowan blinked once. Did? Commander Wolf, just apologize for cuddling. Cashin stared at him flatly. I can still throw you against a wall if you'd prefer. There he is. A tired laugh escaped Cashin before he leaned down and kissed Rowan properly for the first time since entering Rut. Slow, warm, unhurried. Nothing desperate about it anymore. Just real. Rowan's fingers tightened instinctively against the front of Cashin's shirt while the Alpha's hand slid carefully into his hair. Outside the isolation room, storm still howled across Helios Drift. Inside, time felt strangely suspended. The second night became softer somehow. Less feverish. More intimate. They talked more between waves of Rut exhaustion. Sometimes about meaningless things. Sometimes about things neither of them had ever admitted out loud before. You suspected, didn't you? Rowan asked quietly at some point, while lying half across Cashin's chest beneath dim emergency lighting. Cashin hummed sleepily. Suspected what? That I wasn't really a beta. Silence stretched briefly. Then Cashin sighed. Softly. Not exactly. Rowan lifted his head slightly. Cashin stared at the ceiling while speaking. I knew something didn't fit. That's not the same thing. No. Cashin's hand moved slowly through Rowan's hair. I noticed your scent changed sometimes when you were stressed. Rowan froze instantly. Cashin's mouth twitched faintly. Not enough to confirm anything. That's impossible. Probably. Cashin finally looked down at him afterward. You also reacted to my pheromones differently than normal betas. Heat immediately climbed into Rowan's face. Cashin looked unfairly amused by that. And, he added quietly, I've never met anyone who looked at me the way you do. Rowan groaned dramatically and dropped his forehead against Cashin's chest. I'm ending this relationship. No, you're not. Unfortunately, that was true too. Silence settled softly afterward before Rowan finally asked the question that had been sitting heavily inside him for days now. Then why didn't you confront me? Cashin answered immediately. Because if you were hiding it, his voice softened slightly. You had a reason. Something in Rowan's chest hurt sharply at the simple understanding in those words. No accusation. No anger. Just understanding. Rowan stayed quiet for a long moment before finally speaking again. I presented at 14. Cashin's expression darkened instantly. My family bought illegal suppressants before military screening. Silence. They said Omega soldiers don't survive long in combat divisions. Rowan laughed quietly, without humor afterward. So I became a beta instead. Cashin looked at him silently for several seconds before finally pulling Rowan closer until their foreheads touched. You survived anyway, he said quietly. Rowan almost broke apart right there from how gently he said it. The third night arrived quieter than the first two. The worst of the rut had finally passed, leaving only lingering instinct and exhaustion behind. Rowan lay curled comfortably against Cashin's chest, while the Alpha absent-mindedly traced circles against his lower back beneath the blankets. Outside, the storms had finally started weakening. Inside the isolation room, everything felt strangely peaceful for the first time since Helios Drift began. Fox. Rowan hummed sleepily. Cashin stayed quiet for several seconds before speaking again. Once headquarters sees your records, they're going to investigate everything. Rowan's body stiffened slightly. I know. There'll be suspension hearings. Medical review. Questions about your classification. Rowan gave a tired laugh, without humor. Great way to ruin a relationship. Cashin looked down at him afterward with a strange, unreadable softness in his eyes. Then his hand moved slowly upward until his fingers rested gently against Rowan's scent gland. Rowan's breath caught instantly. Elias wasn't only protected because he's exceptional, Cashin said quietly. Bonded Omegas receive legal protection status under military law. Rowan looked at him silently now. Cashin's thumb brushed softly against the sensitive skin beneath his ear. Careful, hesitant, almost nervous, which somehow affected Rowan more than confidence ever could have. Fox, Cashin murmured softly. May I mark you properly? Rowan's heartbeat stuttered painfully hard. 10 years hiding. 10 years terrified of being seen as an Omega. And now the man he loved was asking him like this wasn't ownership, wasn't obligation, wasn't instinct, just choice, just future. Rowan swallowed once before quietly answering, "Okay." Something in Cashin's expression softened instantly afterward. Relief. Affection. Something frighteningly vulnerable beneath both. He leaned down first to kiss Rowan slowly. Once, twice. Warm and lingering enough to make Rowan's chest ache, before finally marking him properly. The bite hurt less than Rowan expected. Warmth spread through his body almost instantly afterward, followed by an overwhelming calm that settled deep beneath his ribs. Cashin pulled him impossibly close immediately afterward, face buried against Rowan's neck while one shaking breath escaped him. "Mine," he whispered hoarsely against the fresh mark. Not possessive, not controlling, just relieved. Rowan closed his eyes slowly while Cashin held him tightly through the rest of the night. For the first time in years, he didn't want to hide anymore. The next morning, emergency communication alarms activated throughout the shelter. Reality crashed back instantly. Headquarters. Reports. Investigations. Rescue. Rowan sat upright too quickly while cold fear twisted sharply through his stomach again. Cashin noticed immediately. "Fox." Rowan looked away. "They're going to suspend me." Silence. Then Cashin answered calmly. "Probably." Rowan stared at him flatly. "You are unbelievably bad at comforting people. I'm aware." Despite that, Cashin still leaned over and pressed one soft kiss directly against the fresh mark on Rowan's neck afterward. "But they won't take you away from me." Before Rowan could answer, another voice suddenly echoed through the isolation speakers. "Rescue teams have entered the shelter perimeter." Outside Helios Drift, rescue ships had finally arrived. And suddenly the storm no longer felt like the biggest thing waiting for them anymore. Rowan spent most of his life surviving. The terrifying part was realizing he finally had the freedom to start living instead. Officially, Lieutenant Rowan Ashford received a 2-year suspension for delayed Omega differentiation, reporting, and medical concealment violations following the Helios Drift incident. Unofficially, everyone involved knew headquarters had only chosen suspension because permanently removing one of their best combat officers would have caused a small civil war once Commander Cashin Wolf got involved. 2 years, Finn repeated dramatically several days later while Rowan packed the last of his office belongings into a storage case. "You're abandoning me." Rowan looked up flatly. "I'm being suspended, not dying." Emotionally identical. Finn immediately burst into loud, fake sobbing anyway. "Who's going to protect me from Commander Wolf now?" "Nobody," Elias answered helpfully from the doorway. "Start preparing your will. This is a hostile work environment." Rowan barely had time to react before Finn launched himself across the room and nearly tackled him into a hug. "I'll miss you." Finn sniffed loudly against Rowan's shoulder. "You live 20 minutes away. Distance means nothing when friendship dies. Please, stop talking." Somewhere behind them, Cashin sighed the deeply exhausted sigh of a man questioning every life decision that had led him here. Honestly, fair. 2 months into suspension leave, Rowan discovered something significantly more terrifying than military investigations. "You're pregnant," the doctor announced carefully during a routine bonded Omega medical checkup. Rowan blinked once, then twice. "I'm sorry, what?" Across the examination room, Cashin went completely motionless. The doctor awkwardly checked the scan again. "Approximately 8 weeks." Silence filled the room. Rowan slowly turned toward Cashin. Cashin slowly looked back at him. Neither of them spoke for several extremely long seconds. Then finally, "Well," Rowan said weakly, "that explains why coffee suddenly tastes illegal." Cashin still looked completely stunned, which honestly felt satisfying considering Rowan himself was currently experiencing a full spiritual evacuation from reality. "You're smiling," Rowan accused suspiciously several minutes later. Cashin immediately attempted to look serious. Failed horribly. "I'm not. Commander Wolf." "Fox, you are literally glowing." "That sounds medically concerning." Rowan stared at him flatly. Cashin finally lost the battle against his own expression and laughed quietly before crossing the room and carefully pulling Rowan against his chest. "We're having a child," he murmured softly into Rowan's hair like he still couldn't quite believe it himself. Terrifyingly enough, Rowan couldn't either. The next several months passed strangely fast afterward. Rowan quickly discovered pregnancy while bonded to an overprotective combat alpha was genuinely one of the most irritating experiences in existence. Fox, sit down. Fox, stop carrying things. Fox, why are you standing on furniture? Because contrary to popular belief, I remain capable of movement. Debatable. Rowan considered murder at least twice a week. Finn, meanwhile, somehow became worse. You need emotional support snacks, Finn announced one afternoon while dumping 3 grocery bags onto Rowan's kitchen counter. Rowan stared. Why did you buy enough fruit to feed a small village? Omega instincts. You're not even an Omega. Emotional Omega. That's not a real thing. It is now. Cashin walked into the kitchen midway through this conversation, took one look at the mountain of groceries, and silently walked back out again. Coward. Elias visited more occasionally, usually bringing actual useful things instead of emotional support strawberries. You know, he commented calmly one evening while assembling a crib with terrifying efficiency. This is significantly less stressful when nobody's trapped inside a collapsing frozen shelter. Rowan snorted softly from the couch. Shocking. Personally, Elias continued thoughtfully, I still think near-death experiences create stronger romantic atmosphere. Please stop helping. Despite all the chaos, though, Rowan slowly realized something strange during those months. He was happy, truly happy. No hiding, no suppressants, no constantly monitoring every movement or scent or instinct around other people. For the first time since he was 14 years old, Rowan existed without fear sitting permanently inside his chest. And honestly, that feeling was far more terrifying than combat had ever been. Their son was born late during winter storms, almost exactly 1 year after Helios drift. The baby arrived furious at the entire universe and immediately screamed loud enough to terrify half the medical wing. Definitely yours, Finn whispered emotionally from the corner of the room. Rowan threw a pillow at him without hesitation. The baby had tiny white ears and dark hair like Cashin's. Cashin spent nearly 20 straight minutes silently staring at his son afterward without speaking once, which honestly started becoming concerning. Cashin, Rowan muttered tiredly from the hospital bed. You're starting to look emotionally unstable. Very slowly, Cashin looked up from the baby sleeping against his chest. His entire expression softened into something Rowan had genuinely never seen before. Something impossibly gentle. He's perfect, Cashin said quietly. Rowan's chest physically hurt at the way he said it. Finn cried harder than the actual parents did. Obviously, the wedding happened 6 months later. Small ceremony. Private. Mostly because Rowan threatened violence if military officials attempted turning it into political propaganda involving bonded Omegas and military reform policies. Cashin still looked entirely too happy during the entire event for someone with his reputation. Rowan still hadn't emotionally recovered from discovering Commander Cashin Wolf apparently smiled now. Frequently. It was deeply disturbing for everyone involved. You know, Elias commented conversationally during the reception while watching Cashin completely fail to stop staring at Rowan across the dance floor. This relationship became significantly healthier after the whole near-death frozen planet situation. Great, Rowan answered dryly. Good to know almost dying improved communication. Character development, Elias corrected. Trauma bonding, Rowan muttered. Nearby, their son made an offended little chirping noise from Finn's arms like he strongly disagreed with that statement. Rowan looked across the reception hall afterward toward Cashin, who was already watching him with that same steady, impossible expression that still made Rowan's heartbeat stumble even after everything they'd been through together. Then Cashin smiled slightly and held one hand out toward him. Simple gesture. Quiet. Familiar. Home. Rowan realized suddenly that somewhere between Helios drift, suspension hearings, sleepless nights, overprotective arguments, and a tiny white-eared baby, he had somehow built the future he never thought someone like him was allowed to have. And maybe that was the most unbelievable thing of all. Cashin Wolf spent over 10 years searching for an Omega whose face he barely remembered. Rowan spent over 10 years trying very hard to forget he had ever existed at all. It happened completely by accident nearly 3 months after the wedding. Rowan had been helping reorganize archived military rescue files while their son slept nearby in a carrier against his chest. Mostly because suspension leave apparently meant headquarters now believed he had endless free time for paperwork, which was insulting. Fox, Cashin's voice called lazily from the office doorway. Have you eaten yet? Rowan didn't look up from the terminal. I had coffee. Silence. That's not food. Debatable. Fox, you sound just like Finn. That's the cruelest thing you've ever said to me. Rowan snorted softly under his breath before opening another damaged archive file. Most of the records were old evacuation reports from pirate raids near outer trade routes over a decade earlier. Routine restoration work. Completely boring. Until one corrupted emergency file suddenly triggered automatic recovery protocols across the screen. Critical incident archive recovered. Rowan frowned slightly, then froze. Casualty report. Cadet Officer Cashin Wolf. Critical condition. Date, 11 years prior. Memory hit instantly afterward. Smoke. Blood. Emergency alarms screaming through collapsing docking corridors. A young Alpha officer barely conscious beside a destroyed shuttle bay while civilians and cadets evacuated in complete panic around him. Rowan had only been 16. Newly presented as an Omega barely months earlier. Terrified constantly. Exhausted constantly. Trying desperately not to attract attention after spending weeks hearing stories about what happened to unbonded Omegas near outer colonies. He had only been at the station temporarily during transport reassignment when the pirate attack happened. Rowan remembered the fear most clearly. Not bravery. Not heroism. Fear. The entire station had been falling apart while smoke flooded the corridors and everyone ran for escape shuttles. Rowan had almost kept running too. Almost. Then he saw the injured Alpha officer collapse near the damaged docking gate, while everyone else pushed past him, trying to survive. Rowan still remembered stopping for one stupid second thinking, someone else will help him. Nobody did. So Rowan went back himself. You're insane, 16-year-old Rowan had muttered breathlessly while half-dragging an unconscious stranger toward the emergency shuttle through smoke and flashing alarms. The Alpha had been heavy even back then. Blood soaked Rowan's sleeves. Emergency sirens screamed loud enough to shake the walls. And throughout all of it, Rowan's newly unstable Omega pheromones had flooded uncontrollably from terror and stress despite every suppressant patch he wore. The injured Alpha officer grabbed weakly at Rowan once before losing consciousness again completely. Rowan remembered white gloves stained with blood, cold eyes barely open, and one rough, exhausted breath against his neck, while Rowan shoved both of them into the last, departing evacuation shuttle seconds before the docking corridor exploded behind them. Afterward, everything became chaos. Medical ships, refugee transfers, witness reports, panic. Rowan never learned the officer's name. And honestly, at 16, terrified of his own Omega presentation and desperately trying to disappear into military academy records before anyone noticed him, Rowan had deliberately forced himself not to think about the incident again. Survival first. Always survival first. Slowly, Rowan looked down now at the recovered rescue image attached to the report. A blurry emergency medical photo taken inside the evacuation shuttle. White Omega ears. White tail. White fur soaked with smoke and blood. Rowan stared silently for several long seconds. Then suddenly remembered something else too. Cashin once drunkenly admitting he had spent years searching for the Omega who saved him. Cashin constantly touching Rowan's white tail without realizing why. Cashin saying his scent felt familiar from the beginning. Oh no, you have got to be kidding me, Rowan whispered weakly at the screen. The office door opened behind him a second later. Cashin walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee before immediately stopping when he saw Rowan's expression. Fox. Rowan slowly turned the monitor toward him. You once told me an Omega saved your life. Cashin went completely still. Silence filled the office instantly. Then his eyes dropped toward the recovered image on the screen. Rowan watched the exact moment recognition hit him. Not visually. Instinctively. Cashin set the coffee down slowly without taking his eyes off the photo. The scent, he said quietly. Rowan blinked once. Cashin still stared at the image, almost absently now. That's why it felt familiar. Rowan looked at him like he'd lost his mind. You recognized me by scent after 11 years? Not consciously. Cashin finally looked up at him afterward, expression still stunned in a way Rowan had genuinely never seen before. I barely remembered the station. I was unconscious most of the time. His voice softened slightly. All I remembered clearly was an Omega with white for pulling me into an evacuation shuttle while everything burned. Rowan stared silently. Cashin looked back toward the screen again afterward. I searched for you for years. Rowan immediately covered his face with one hand. This is the stupidest thing that has ever happened to me. Fox. No, seriously. Rowan looked genuinely offended by reality now. You mean to tell me I accidentally rescued my future husband during a pirate attack and then forgot about it because I had identity issues? Cashin's mouth twitched visibly. When you say it out loud, it does sound slightly ridiculous. Slightly. Rowan dropped his hand dramatically. This sounds like badly written military romance propaganda. A soft, amused laugh finally escaped Cashin then. Quiet. Warm. Real. Rowan still wasn't fully emotionally prepared for how unfairly attractive that sound was. Their son suddenly made a tiny, sleepy, chirping noise from the carrier against Rowan's chest like he wanted to participate in the conversation too. Cashin's entire expression softened immediately at the sound before he crossed the office slowly and rested one hand gently against the baby's white ears. Then his gaze lifted back toward Rowan again. Steady. Familiar. Home. I think, Cashin said quietly after a long moment. I was probably always going to find you somehow. Rowan's heartbeat stumbled painfully hard at that, which was honestly unfair after everything they'd already survived together.